I'm not going to talk for a long time today, maybe half the time, and then we'll do something else at the other end after 12:30. I just wanted to start today by thanking Kokai and Tetsugen. Very rewarding for me that they fully gave themselves to the ceremony, and congratulations. Much congratulations, wherever you are. I don't know where's oh, there they are, there they are. Should have seen by their shiny heads. Okay. I just wanted, I don't know if everybody noticed, I kind of pointed it out, but what kept coming up in the particular part of the ceremony for, I think it was called the admonitions for Shukkei Tokudo, was it kept mentioning self-clinging all the time. It was like, it was getting boring, the self-clinging. But so I just wanted to summarize the essence of the practice in a way from two perspectives. I've got a quote from a writer I really like called Rodney Smith, and this is just a summary from some of you may know. I mean, I've précis this. From Assagioli's right-hand man, Piero Ferrucci, who was the founder of the psychosyntheses, which works in a similar way, but in a therapeutic way, on small self and big self. And he uses personality as opposed to small self, and he uses self with a capital S, where we may use absolute or emptiness or any of those other phrases. So this is kind of a summary of what the whole business is about, as I understand it. So Piero starts off with number one is that when we're in our ordinary everyday personality, and we'll call it our small self or our dual self, and stop me if this doesn't reference you or doesn't apply to you, but we try to control our life and determine its course in ways which we think will be favourable to us, which is perfectly okay. Why wouldn't we do that? But the important word there, I think, is in ways which we think will be favourable to us. In practice, it turns out often that isn't the case. And it arises out of the constrictions or the fears of our ordinary personality. At the level of self with a capital S, this control gives way to a surrender to life. And I'll say a bit more about surrender later on, because it's a funny word, surrender. It kind of brings up fear for folk to surrender. But to surrender to what life brings along. So they're the two ideas. One is we try and control life and determine it, and the other, we surrender to what life brings, which Dogen calls the 10,000 things. We allow the 10,000 things in, rather than we try and control the 10,000 things. And Ferrucci uses a very nice analogy. He says, usually we are like people who are on a moving train, who still hang on to our suitcase. And he says, why carry it? If we put it on the floor, it will be carried by the train, and we shall be relieved of the effort of holding it. It's a very nice metaphor for surrender. We're all carrying our own suitcases, and if we had trust, more trust, then it can be carried. So, just to continue with that, he says that the personality has a certain model of how it all should be, and it tends to be closed to any events that don't fit into those kind of narrow margins or expectations that we have. And I think what we find pragmatically is very definitely the model that we have that we would like to see enacted or manifested most of the time simply doesn't. At some point in our lives we all find ourselves in a film that we didn't think we wrote the script for and that we didn't direct, and isn't the film that we particularly want to be in. Opposed to that, the self with a capital S is more open and satisfied with what comes along. Now, the surrender thing, when we say surrender, it can be confused, I think, with the idea of being fatalistic, of fatalism. And surrender absolutely isn't about being fatalistic. It doesn't deny, it doesn't suppress any form of wider awareness or even control. And the metaphor that Piero uses, which I really like again, same with the train, is he compares it to the conductor of an orchestra. So you would never say, I mean, when you see them on the podium doing their thing, you would never say that they'd surrendered or that they'd given up any self-volition. But nevertheless, they have a score that they have to follow, and they give all their efforts and all their personal resources and all their creativity to following the score in the way that they want to interpret it, and you know, and that can be, when we surrender to our lives, we it's not like we've given up. There's still creativity, possibility. We just instead work with what we have. We embrace what we have, and then we orchestrate that in the ways that would really bring well-being or satisfaction or happiness, or however we want to call it. Yeah. But for most of us, we try and impose we have a fixed set of conditions, and we try and keep them fixed, or we try and impose on them. You know, we particularly do it with people in our lives, with our partners or friends or job or whatever. It doesn't mean that you can't change all those things, or there isn't any self-volition, but we do have to use the score. And if you write your own score, well, my pragmatic experience is that it ends in disappointment. Because life never matches how you really, really like it to be. So it's a kind of wise thing to do. Okay, so and now there's a more traditional. That's about, you know, that is all about the loss of self-clinging. That's what he's talking about. Giving up on self-clinging. This is Rodney Smith's view from a very traditional perspective of giving up on self-clinging. And I'll read you what he says, because he says it much better than I could. He says, ideally, that was my word. I always like to condition these things, because, you know, if you expect too much of yourself, that's too much as well. So ideally, the Buddha's teachings move us from a contracted, isolated entity called me to the freedom and interdependence of our empty and selfless nature, free of suffering. We could say that the Buddha's teaching moves along a continuum from suffering to the end of suffering, or from belief in self to the certainty of emptiness. We suffer because we imagine that reality holds options that it does not. And he calls that the second noble truth. We suffer because we imagine that reality holds options that it does not. That's the second noble truth, i.e. Desire. And we then infuse energy into these mental choices and attachments, ultimately resisting what is, and thus creating dissatisfaction as a result. This is the first noble truth. We infuse energy into our mental choices and attachments, ultimately resisting what is, and thus creating dissatisfaction as a result. First noble truth. All this is done within our thoughts as the thinking mind embellishes the images of our fantasies and creates alternative stories and possibilities. Okay. Who hasn't been subject to their own stories and alternative possibilities? Knowing the nature of our thinking mind and taking into account the resolution of suffering, which is to abide fully with things as they are, is the third noble truth. No. Knowing the nature of our thinking mind and taking into account the resolution of suffering, which is to abide fully with things as they are, e.g., embrace our life, surrender to our life, is the third noble truth. We could then say that Buddhism moves us from the trance of thought, e.g. desire, to stillness, end of desire, and that the sacred is that which is not contained by thought and is therefore unconditioned. Our practice then should resolve the compulsion to think and ultimately lead us into a deeper quietude. And that's the summary of the whole deal. Yeah. But the emphasis on all these things and the Buddha's realization is that self-clinging is what finally causes us to not be at ease in our lives. Doesn't mean all the time we're not. I mean, we may well be, but at the very root, maybe we're not. And then I just wanted to. This is like a kind of summary of the journey we may go through, and this journey may take place on one day, it may take place in a whole life. So this is how I see it. Yeah. So we start off and we're leading our lives, careers and jobs and hopes and partnerships, and we may be high functioning and it may all work. And then at one point we realise that actually it's not really working. It's not really doing it. It's not scratching the itch. And why is that? What's got? And we start to question the whole structure of our lives, the whole business, the whole, why am I alive? What's the point? And at that point, we can start to suffer a real sense of disappointment or nihilism or whatever. It's not happening. And maybe then we find ourselves in a practice, not necessarily this one, but But for us here, we find ourselves within a traditional Zen way, and we may be a bit resistant to it at first, and then suddenly we're on the cushion, and we think, here's a possible release, here's a possible way of finding our way home. And we're full of beans and enthusiastic and excited about it, and you hear all these phrases about having our hair on fire and dropping off body and mind, and all those things. And finally, we stick with it, and we may even have a big experience. We may have an opening experience. We may find, I'm at one with everything. Everything's interdependent, and I really understand this whole thing, and it's great, And then the ego. This is not for us all, by the way, and as I say, this is not one fixed thing. It can happen all the time and move around. But then the ego is really excited by that. This is fantastic. I really found a way where not only can I be at ease, but I can also have some credibility. I may even get some power. Maybe even the opposite sex may think more of me because I'm really, I'm on a spiritual path and I'm developing my masculinity or my femininity, or it's all, and at this point, spiritual materialism really starts to kick in. This is. I found something that can, that can really buy me some proper credibility in the world, and it can also settle me. That can last for a while, and then disappointment kicks in again. Because it doesn't last. Because we keep being told that you start to kick up against other people who are spiritually materialistic, and who may be in a Sangha, who may be fighting you for position, or all these things go on, And finally, we then realise that actually it isn't that easy. and we have to dig in, we have to commit, and we decide to stay. And at this point, some people will understandably leave, because it's not doing the job, it's not another path that didn't scratch the itch. Maybe I'll find something somewhere else, maybe I'll go to Tibet or whatever. But if we stick at it, and we stick in, and we kick in, and we really make a decision to with serious intention to stay present, to really, finally see that this is work, 24/7. It's not just a part-time thing to help us function in life, if that's what we really want. Finally, the whole thing starts to make sense a little, and self-clinging we see that quite selfishly, if you like, the self-clinging doesn't necessarily work in helping us to be better, or not better, or have more well-being and feel more at ease with life. Then the real practice starts. And then maybe we will have another different type of understanding and opening. And there may be a big one, it may just be a slow realization, or none of it may happen at all. That's absolutely fine as well. We may just find that this is what works for us, and pragmatically this is what we need to do to continue in the practice, and to feel that in our own lives there's now some real authenticity and credibility, and not necessarily yet a raison d'etre that's bigger than your own ambitions or aspirations, but so we carry on. And then the final stage really is that we discover that coming down off, in the traditional ways, we come down off the mountain, we're back in the marketplace, and we're just doing our thing, but we're doing it in a different way. We're not doing it necessarily for ourselves, or that, there's nothing wrong with that, but we are definitely committed to supporting other folk. And that's the kind of whole thing of it. And as I said, we can all move back and forth between all these stages, even in a day. But in the terms of the kind of pathway of our lives, this has been my experience of what the tradition or the way is about. Yeah. I don't know if that resonates with anybody, or whether anything come up from it to ask me, but please do. But but let. Does anything? Sorry, maybe nothing's come up for you. Maybe should we move on? But if something's come up, let's talk about it briefly.
Well, it certainly has for me. Yeah, I very much resonate with what you say. I've sometimes felt that all my practice has been a big ego trip, really.
Yeah.
So I was in that thing, where I think, it's making me a more interesting person, or something like this.
Yeah.
And and then you shed that eventually, I hope. I mean, I'm not saying I've come to any realisation or anything, but just when you're sitting there, you then you're back to square one again, aren't you? You're right back where you ought to be, and all that ego stuff is maybe you just can't keep it going.
Yeah.
So you're just staring at the floor again.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, when I sometimes look back on it, it's been I think worthwhile, but at the same time, I now see how much the ego was grabbing at it, and making it my possession, so I could be this person, and then I'd advertise it, and in a way it put me off practice for a bit as well, and I wouldn't tell people I did it, Buddhism or Zen or anything. I got sick to death of this ego thing, to me. For me, this is mine.
Thanks, Gordon. That's great. Thank you.
I agree with that. I spent at least 10 years convinced I had something. I think at least 10 years, like something I had that I could offer. Something, that this is, I've got it. 10 years, and didn't move from that point at all. And then I think you smashed it with one good punch. basically. And then I realised, actually, we come and just sit on our cushion and sit quietly and shut up and get on with it.
Thank you.
Well, he did it good.
A couple of days ago, I was listening to Andy talk about the blank sheet, the blank canvas, and I was thinking, oh my God, that's a bit scary. I don't know what I'm going to put on that canvas. And then you started talking about there being a score, and I was thinking, oh great, there is a score. I just have no idea what that score is.
No, that's our job, isn't it? To find the score. Yeah. I don't know whether it's true for you all, but in a way, just right now, when we've all done a lot of work, you know, we've really committed to being here, we've given up a lot to be here, we've sat, and it's tough to sit for 5-6 days. We're on the last day, and the weather's gorgeous, the geese are flying it, on their way. We all feel a bit more at ease. This is as good as it gets. You don't need more than this.